The doctor's opinion. We of Alcoholic Anonymous believe that the reader will be interested in the medical estimate of the plan of recovery described in this book. Convincing testimony must surely come from medical men who have had experience with the sufferings of our members and have witnessed our return to health. A well-known doctor, chief physician at a nationally prominent hospital specializing in alcoholic and drug addiction, gave Alcoholics Anonymous this letter, to whom it may concern. I have specialized in the treatment of alcoholism for many years. In late 1934, I attended a patient who, though he had been a competent businessman of good earning capacity, was an alcoholic of a type I had come to regard as hopeless. In the course of his third treatment, he acquired certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. As part of his rehabilitation, he commenced to present his conceptions to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with still others. This has become the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of these men and their families. This man and over 100 others appear to have recovered. I personally know scores of cases who were of the type with whom other methods had failed completely. These facts appear to be of extreme medical importance because of the extraordinary possibilities of rapid growth inherent in this group. They may mark a new epoch in the annals of alcoholism. These men may well have a remedy for thousands of such situations. You may rely absolutely on anything they say about themselves. Very truly yours, William D. Silkworth, MD. The physician who our request gave us this letter has been kind enough to enlarge upon his views in another statement which follows. In this statement, he confirms what we who are suffered alcoholic torture must believe, that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind. It did not satisfy us to be told that we could not control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life, that we were in full flight from reality, or were outright mental defectives. These things were true to some extent, in fact, to a considerable extent with some of us, but we are sure that our bodies were sickened as well. In our belief, any picture of the alcoholic which leaves out this physical factor is incomplete. Pass.
Okay, thanks, Lorena. Okay, hi, I'm Leslie, an alcoholic addict. The doctor's theory that we have an allergy to alcohol interests us. As a layman, our opinion as to its soundness may, of course, mean little. But as ex-problem drinkers, we can say that his explanation makes good sense. It explains many things for which we cannot otherwise account. Though we work out our solution on the spiritual as well as an altruistic plane, we favour hospitalisation for the alcoholic who is very jittery or befogged. More often than not, it is imperative that a man's brain be cleared before he is approached, and he has then a better chance of understanding and accepting what we have to offer. The doctor writes, the subject presented in this book seems to me to be of paramount importance to those afflicted with alcohol addiction. I say this after many years' experience as medical director of one of the oldest hospitals in the country, treating alcoholic and drug addiction. There was therefore a sense of real satisfaction when I was asked to contribute a few words on a subject which is covered in such masterly detail in these pages. We doctors have realised for a long time that some form of moral psychology was of urgent importance to alcoholics, but its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. What with our ultra-modern standards and our scientific approach to everything, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of a good lie outside our synthetic knowledge. Many years ago, one of the leading contributors to this book came under our care in this hospital, and while here, he acquired some ideas which he put into practical application at once. Later, he requested the privilege of being allowed to tell his story to other patients here, and with some misgiving, we consented. The cases we have followed through have been most interesting. In fact, many of them are amazing. The unselfishness of these men, as we have come to know them, the entire absence of profit motive, and their community spirit is indeed inspiring to one who has laboured long and wearily in this alcoholic field. They believe in themselves and still more in the power which pulls chronic alcoholics back from the gates of death. Of course, an alcoholic ought to be freed from his physical cravings for liquor, and this often requires a definite hospital procedure before psychological measures can be of maximum benefit. We believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. And once having formed the habit and found they cannot break it, once having lost their self-confidence and their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. Frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices.
You just finished that paragraph.
Yeah, should I carry on or?
Yeah, finish that paragraph, yeah.
The message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. In nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives.
Well, thanks everyone for being here. So this is one of 3 parts in a series on the Doctor's Opinion and sponsorship. All 3 parts will be available on the Cocaine Anonymous YouTube channel, which can be accessed by going to youtube.com and typing in Cocaine Anonymous 12 step, and it's the word 12. So yeah, Paul, recovered addict. I'm clean today by the grace and loving kindness of God, the company I keep, the literature I read, pushing a few buttons on Zoom, working with others daily, reading spiritual literature, morning devotions, being responsible, good self-care, and maintaining a sober network. Now, those things are precisely why I'm clean today, not possibly or kind of, but precisely. And furthermore, they're the ways that anyone can recover from what seems to be a hopeless state of mind and body. It is a common solution. So we're going to start off with a brief recap of the previous segment we did on this topic. And then I'm going to talk briefly about sponsorship, at least my understanding of it. And then I'm going to take a quick trot through how I personally work the 12 steps with others. So in the previous segment, we looked at the germane points of the Doctor's Opinion. The principal element initially is the basis of what we do is ordinary folk sharing their ideas and appreciation of sobriety, of how they get and how they stay clean and sober. And that's the basis of the fellowship that Silkworth mentions. He then goes on to talk about how they have recovered, and that's the first mention of that word in the actual text. And someone goes through these 12 steps, they become a recovered man or a recovered woman. It doesn't mean they're perfect. It means they don't obsess about acquiring drink and drugs, and therefore they don't ingest drink or drugs. That's how I see recovered. And then he goes on to talk about how most chronic alcoholic addicts are doomed unless they can have this psychic change, this internal shift. And that happens incrementally, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but it happens in those aforementioned ways. And then he goes on to talk, as Lorena and Leslie just beautifully read for us, about presenting these ideas to other folk. Other methods have failed completely, and there's lots of other methods to recover out there, folks. You know what I mean? We don't have a monopoly on sobriety in 12 steps, you know. And so he goes on to talk about the bodily aspect. So the first step is about an understanding and acceptance and appreciation of the mental and physical problem of addiction that results in a whole bunch of unwelcome circumstances. Work in step 1 is, in my opinion, experience is well worth several hours to get a proper step one in place. You know, an addict dies every 6 seconds on this planet. It's a progressive fatal illness, but it can be arrested at any point, and recovery is then possible. So having an understanding of the physical and mental components of addiction and the results of that, the unmanageability, is the essence of the first step. You know, it's not simply that we're maladjusted to life or in full flight from reality or mentally defective. There's some aspects of those things in most folk, but there's the physical aspect. But after a week or so, the stuff's out the system, and it's largely a problem of mental control. And then your mind will be clear enough to address the spiritual aspect, which is the Creator, God. And it's very important to have clarity of thought to accept and receive this message of hope, courage, and freedom. And then there's mention of the moral psychology and divine power. This chapter on the screen is possibly one of the most important in the doctor's opinion. The program's described by a very intelligent doctor as moral psychology plus God's power. And then, of course, the Wilson was quite keen coming for his third treatment at this fancy rehab in America. But he brought a treatment with him, and it was this basis of sharing, of honesty, of acceptance, of faith and trust and commitment. So then he goes on to talk about the allergy. The book calls the problem an illness, an allergy, a disease, the problem. The solution is called the program, a design for living, a set of principles, a design for living, a few simple rules. You know, the answer. There's various terms for problem and solution. The message must have depth and weight, you know, and anyone working in this field with addict alcoholics is all too aware of the problems this causes for children, for partners, for employers, and of course for the individuals themselves. It's always poverty that brings people to recovery: emotional poverty, mental poverty, physical poverty, and of course financial poverty. And although they know it's wrong to carry on, they lose the capacity to differentiate the true from the false, and they become restless, irritable, discontent, unless they can again experience a sense of ease and comfort. But once they have this entire psychic change, they're easily able to control any desire for drink and drugs if they're willing to follow a few simple rules, which is the things I outlined initially: morning devotions, maintaining daily a sober network, reading spiritual literature throughout the day, different times each day, staying in prayer, being responsible, going through the 12 steps. And once they've had this shift, as I say, they're easily able to control the desire for drink and drugs. So that pretty much brings us where we're up to on the last broadcast. So I want to just talk now about sponsorship and getting some identification of the problem and the solution with your new person. The problem is less than half the folk that go through the 12 steps go on to consistently sponsor in the real world. That's the truth. You know, the problem with that is a lot of them do pick up again because they're not living in the solution, carrying the message, feeding others. You know what I mean? And of course, there's less availability of sponsors to take folk through the steps. So it's very problematic, you know, and of course, it's not a mind control cult. You're free to do what the hell you want to do. But whilst you have freedom of choice, you do not have freedom of consequence. So if you're a chronic addict or even a heavy user, my suggestion would be take suggestions. My suggestion would be read the book for yourself as a man or a woman. Go through all these 12 steps, become a free, recovered man accountable to God alone, and learn and grow in understanding and effectiveness to carry this message, you know. And so we talked yesterday about my understanding. This is just my opinion. I'm well aware there's dozens of modes of sponsorship out there. But initially on first contact, I want to know if the person's asking for sponsorship, when was the last time they had a fortnight or more of continuous sobriety? What's the drug of choice, quantity of usage, frequency of usage, duration of usage. I need to know if they've got any domestic accountability, i.e. is there anyone in their house that's going to help them stay honest and live right. I want to know if they've got any literature. I want to know if they're willing to stay sober at least till they get through all 12 steps and make a commitment to getting through the steps. And I want to know if they're willing to talk every day for half an hour or so every day. You know, and I explain to them that the prime thing, the only thing I insist on is that they must keep the mutually agreed appointments, which we'll make on each call for the next day. So once I've established those things, I will ask them to write a consequences list of a dozen or 18 bullet points that describe the reality of the circumstances using and boozing, and send it me on WhatsApp. And that will form the basis of the call the next day for half an hour, and we'll spend all that time. It won't be intensive. It won't be intense, but it'll be intensive in terms of we'll talk for that largely for most of the half an hour through that list. And I'll give them little bits of identification. I'll let them do a lot of the talking as we trot through astutely through the points. And I'll probably spend 5 minutes teaching them the 12 suggestions, particularly if they're new, in terms of get a home group, share regularly, phone a couple of folk up in the programme every day, morning devotions. If they're new, I'll explain what that is. I'll send them meeting information, make sure they've got some literature, some free PDFs, and perhaps get them connected with a few other folk in the programme as well, if necessary. And on that next call, as I say, we'll go through that list. I'll explain the suggestions, arrange the time for the next call, and I'll ask them to read the doctor's opinion. And then on the next call the next day, we will trot through all the important bits of the doctor's opinion, which they'll have just read. I'll also have them do a podcast in between each step that we work in their own time on that particular step, and also read that step out of the 12 and 12. Why wouldn't you do that? It gives them a thorough experience. It's free. Why wouldn't you ask them to do that in their own time, you know? And so this is the evolved understanding over a good while that I'm at. Maybe 6 months from now, will be modified further. So what I want to do now is just trot through the rest of the 12 steps, my current understanding of the best way for me that I've seen in this life or death errand. So next up is we will then do step 2. Once I'm content that they've completed step 1, that they understand the mental and physical components that result in all their problems that are brought to recovery, we'll then talk about being restored to sanity. What are some good examples of sanity? They'll be reading a chapter of the big book in their own time each day, as well as reading the step out of the 12 and 12 in their own time. We will talk about being restored to sanity, what that means, faith and trust. So it's honesty, open-mindedness, willingness, problem solution, commitment. That's 1, 2, 3. And the very fact that they're keeping appointments, doing the things suggested, that's evidence of their faith and trust that there's a solution, which is the essence of the second step. There's always a solution, and it's always acceptance and action and surrender. And then we'll work on step 3. Step 3 and 11 are very important in terms of commitment, faith and trust, and growth and change. We will read on step 3, 58 to 60, which is how it works. Rarely have we seen a person fails through the followed our path. And the ABCs on page 60, that we were alcoholic and couldn't manage our own lives. B, probably no human power could relieve us of our alcoholism. C, God could and would if he was sought. And once I'm sure that they've got that commitment, they've made that decision, we'll then move on to the 4th step. Now, on the Cocaine Anonymous YouTube channel, there's a podcast that Jess and I, a woman with many years of continuous experience working the steps with folks, we explain how simple it is to complete 4 and 5. You know, people get stuck, you know what I mean? And folk log into meetings and tell how bad it is. Well, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing, and it can be done astutely and efficiently, easily in under a week. You know, my guidance around that is never do any step 4 work in the evenings, mornings or afternoon, never more than 40 minutes at a time. Don't share any of the step 4 work you're doing until you've completed all 12 steps, unless in terms of specific step 9 amends. I've started step 4 with a precious member today, and it'll be done in the same way. I've just finished doing it with someone else a few days ago. So we'll make a list of things the person's angry about. Once you can't remember anymore, that's you done. Leave a little bit of space. If anything comes back to you, pop it on there. It's the big things. It's not the neighbour's cat woke me up last Tuesday. Well, that guy owes me a tenner from 2015. It's the big things. And when you can't remember, after a minute or two contemplation, anything else you're angry about, you're done. You feel me? You're done. It's time to move on to your fears. Right? It's not a psychiatry session. You know what I mean? I'm not a psychiatrist. We're listing things you're angry about, things you're scared of, and harms you've done to others. Yeah. So, you know, resentments, most folk have between 10 and 24 resentments. Most folk have between 8 and 1.5 dozen fears. If you're getting past them numbers, you could be dealing with a bit of self-obsession, paralysis by analysis. It's just the big things you want to put down. So on the resentments, you're listing who you're angry at, why you're angry with them, how it affects you, self-esteem, ambitions, sex life, finance, well-being. Did it adversely affect you? Did you become increasingly dishonest or selfish or fearful? And then the last box is the solution. What's my part, blame, responsibility? What was my response? What ought my response to have been? Am I willing to forgive this person and move on? And that's how I do step 4. It's solution, solution, solution. And then we're on to the next slide and we'll fill out the next one. Who you're angry at, why you're angry at them, how it makes you feel, how it affected you. Did you become dishonest, self-seeking, fearful, inconsiderate? What's your part? What was your response? What ought your response to have been? Are you willing to forgive them? Next line. Most folks, you can get through your resentments in 2 or 3 half-an-hour phone calls, and I do it with them over the phone. And then we move on to the fears. What are you scared of? How does it affect you? You know, what is the solution? How can you move forward with this? Where is the growth? And then we're on to the next one. Again, 2 or 3 half-an-hour phone calls almost always does it. The same with the harms. Now, because you're doing it with a person, that forms the bulk of step 5. And we will also do the step 5, but because we've worked through it together, we've done the bulk of the 5th step there. So 6 and 7 are doing one phone call. We simply make a list of character defects, shortcomings, a list of character assets, and then we'll pray through both lists, which is always very, very blessed and very precious. We simply individually, I'll pray through the first list, they'll then pray through the first list, I'll pray through the second list of character assets, they'll pray through the second list, and that's 6 and 7 done. Bear in mind they'll have done the podcast of the CA YouTube channel. They'll have also read that particular step out, the 12 and 12, in their own time. Step 8, we're simply going to mutually agree, realistic, achievable amends, whether it's financial, delivered letter, undelivered letter, telephone or in person, or graveside. And we're going to list the person, what you did to them, you know, how you think they feel about it. And then we're going to, on the far right, we're going to list the appropriate, achievable amends. And we're going to trot through it astutely. And most folk, you can do the list in 2 half-an-hour phone calls. The step 9 phone call will be just explaining to them the letters simply need to be a brief, to the point, 2 or 3 short paragraphs, 3 or 4 sentences. Organise the financial amends, when it's going to be made, to whom and how. And I always have folk write the undelivered letters, the delivered letter, then the phone calls, then the in-person amends, culminating with the most important person in their life, usually their partner or their parents or siblings. And that's how I do it. So I'll explain that to them in the 9-step phone call. The very next day we'll do step 10. I have a sheet that I've compiled that explains the 3 types of inventory. And they'll obviously be reading into action and the appropriate bit of the big book, and also out of the 12 and 12 and also the podcast. And we'll simply talk about spot check inventory, nightly inventory, and mini inventory. And then on the next day, we'll start step 11, which we'll usually do over 2 or 3 days. And 11 and 12, I handle in similar ways. There'll be 4 or 5 questions on each step. They'll simply write the question, answer it. Who is God? What is the will of God? You know, what is prayer? What is meditation? What is conscious contact? I'll also have them do a bit of research in their own time on prayer. Step 12, again, what is a spiritual awakening? How has it happened? How can I carry the message? And they'll write, say, 3 or 4 sentences on each question, and we'll talk through that together. I will also suggest a couple of answers which they'll write down. And then during step 12, I'll of course proffer the question, are they willing to take other folk through the 12 steps? You know, we live in the real world, folks. It's very idealistic and romantic to say, oh, are you willing to go to Ireland? So you're willing to sponsor? And they say, oh, yes, but in the real world, less than half do. Yeah. So as a mature person, a mature waiter is, are you willing to take others through the steps? And usually they are, not always. Some folks may say they will, but the reality is they don't. And if they say yes, I will usually say, well, my suggestion is that you reread the first 103 pages starting now or whenever you've finished the 103 that we've been currently going through, and reread the 12 steps out of 12 and 12. Listen to the 3 podcasts on sponsorship on the YouTube channel. What is a sponsor? Am I ready to become a sponsor? And how do I sponsor? Then let me know, and we'll have 3 half-an-hour phone calls where I'll share more and answer any questions about techniques and boundaries. And that's how I take folk through the 12 steps, folks. And that takes about 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks, start to finish, working together each day. And that's proven so far to produce the best results, you know. And I would say it's difficult to quantify because some folk vanish back into the woodwork, but I would say around a half stay permanently sober. I would say about a third will pick up again for a day, maybe 2 days. And then the remainder may pick up for days or weeks, and a very small portion will pick up again and really struggle because it's such a powerful, transformative thing to go through all these 12 steps. So in closing, this is all with the hope that anyone listening to this will take others through the steps. Folk ain't dying because they're going through the steps wrong. They're dying because they're not going through the steps, chiefly because there ain't enough wise, informed, prudent folk available to take folk through the steps. And the reason for that is folk are fearful of doing it, folk are lazy, and folk are self-centered, you know. And I understand the fearful aspect. You know, there's rational fear and irrational fear. It's irrational to think you need to be scared of taking them through the steps, folks. You're not going to harm anyone by helping them get honest about their unmanageability. You're not going to harm anyone opening up a book in the simplest form of taking someone through the steps, opening up the doctor's opinion, reading a page, stopping and chatting about it for 2 or 3 minutes. You're not going to harm anyone. If they pick up again, that's 100% on them. You know, we need everyone to get through the steps and start taking others through the steps. It's a great way to live, and nothing ensures immunity from addiction more than taking others through the steps consistently. So I'm glad to be clean. I'm going to quit flapping my gums, and I'm going to hand it back to Amanda. Thanks for letting me share.